Hi, I'm Isabel. I'm one of the MA students in the Conservation of Archaeological and Ethnographic Materials programs at UCLA Getty.
And hi, I'm Jenny. I'm also one of the students in the MA program at UCLA. Before we start, I'd just like to give a land grant acknowledgement. The UCLA Getty IDP acknowledges the Gabrielino Tongva peoples as the traditional land caretakers of Tovong are the Los Angeles Basin and Southern Channel Islands. As a land grant institution, we pay our respects to the Hanukvatem, Ahihirum, and Iohinkem, past, present, and emerging.
So first off, we want to thank everyone for being here. We're really excited to welcome you to the first presentation in the new UCLA Getty Conservation Conversation series. On the last Friday of every month, we'll be inviting new guests engaged with exciting research in the conservation field. Today, Dr. Ziad Al-Saad will be kicking off the series by sharing his experience with the conservation of stone monuments at the World Heritage Site of Petra, which is an ongoing research project supported by the Faculty of Archaeology and Anthropology at Yarmouk University.
And just a quick housekeeping before we get into the introductions. As Deidre mentioned, Dr. Al-Saad will be doing a Q&A session at the end of this program. So if you have any questions, just a reminder to type it into the Q&A, and we will read it aloud in order that they arrive. And if you have a question at the end, you can also use the raise hand function to ask the question yourself.
Dr. Ziad Al-Saad is the professor of cultural heritage conservation and management at the Faculty of Archaeology and Anthropology, Yarmouk University. He obtained his PhD in art conservation and archaeometry from the University of London in 1992. He served as the chair of Department of Archaeology in the period between 1994 and 1999, and then became the director of the Institute of Archaeology and Anthropology at Yarmouk University, which he then transformed and expanded into a fully fledged faculty in 1999. And he became the first dean for the expanded institution for 2 terms. In 2007, he moved to the newly established German Jordanian University as vice president for academic affairs for 2 years and led the university's strategic planning and quality assurance programs for those 2 years. In 2010, he returned to Yarmouk University as vice president for research and international affairs. He was then appointed by the cabinet as director general of the Department of Antiquities of Jordan until the end of 2011, when he returned to Yarmouk University. Professor Al-Saad's research interests are generally in the areas of conservation and scientific analysis of archaeological materials, with a particular focus on the conservation and stabilization of archaeological finds, especially metallic artifacts and stone monuments. He has been actively involved in the preservation and conservation of spectacular stone-carved monuments in the Nabatean city of Petra. Dr. Al-Saad is joining us today from Jordan, so if we can all give him a big round of applause. I guess really Jenny and I can, and we'll be representing all of you. So we welcome him and thank him for staying up so late to speak with us. With that, I'll turn it over.
Hey, thank you very much for this great introduction. And first of all, I would like to really thank the organizers of this magnificent lecture series of UCLA and Getty. I feel really truly privileged and honored to be the first lecturer in this great series. My presentation will be about the conservation research on the stone monuments of Petra, which is an ongoing research project for the Faculty of Archaeology and Anthropology at Yarmouk University for over now 25 years. So this is a project that has started in 1994 and focused on the conservation of the World Heritage Site of Petra. It has been done with really true partnership with various international and national institutions and agencies, including UNESCO, the German Corporation for International Cooperation, GIZ, the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, through its Siyaha project, and a very important project in Jordan, Department of Antiquities of Jordan, and Petra Development and Tourism Regional Authority, BDTRA. Now, before I go to the conservation part, I will give you a short introduction about this amazing and magnificent site. Petra, the spectacular sandstone city of Petra, which was built in the 3rd century BC by the Nabateans and Arab nomads, who carved palaces, temples, tombs, storerooms, stables from this soft sandstone. So Petra was their capital, which it thrived as an important trading post on the international spice route. Petra is not just an important site for Jordan. It's the most important site actually in Jordan, but also it is a renowned World Heritage Site. Petra was inscribed on the World Heritage List in 1985, and it was voted as one of the 7 wonders of the world in 2007. So it has really an international recognition. And all you know maybe that Petra was the place where the blockbusters, this very important and famous movie, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, was filmed. It was filmed in Petra, and that really gave a big boost to the city. It was a big promotion to Petra, but at the same time, it was really a big promotion for the movie. So Petra is one of the world's most famous tourist attraction. And as I mentioned to the organizers at the introduction, that no visit to Jordan is complete without really at least 2 days spent exploring this remarkable city. Petra is one of the world's most famous archaeological sites because of its universal significance and value. For example, in this city, ancient Eastern traditions blend in an amazing way with Hellenistic and Roman architecture. You can find that in the facades of many of the monuments. At this site also, there was really an innovative hydraulic system created by the Nabateans. And also they developed an amazing type of pottery. So innovation and technology was really clear. Everywhere you walk in Petra, you see remains of these amazing innovative technologies. At its height, archaeologists believe that Petra would have had about 2,000 monuments and a population of 20,000 to 30,000. Now, some believes, there are some debates still between archaeologists, some believe that Petra is the city of the dead and the religious ceremonies because of the large number of religious centers and temples. But still, I think we believe that more and more of archaeological excavations are needed before we can reveal all the treasures of Petra and we can establish really or write the full story of Petra. We need to do much more archaeology and excavation and interpretation. This is just a glimpse of what you can see in Petra. There are some of the amazing monuments. In particular, this amazing scene, which is Petra at night, is really something special. But also you can see in Petra some stone carved monuments. At the same time, you find also some built structures, especially the famous Casserole Bent and the Winged Lion, Temple of Winged Lion. Petra at risk. Unfortunately, this amazing monuments and amazing city is under the imminent threat of damage and destruction due to a combination of human and natural factors. Really, about 800 top facades are listed today out of the 2,000 facades originally were there. And you can see that the deterioration and decay of Petra is really alarming and is really a real threat to the existence, to the very existence of this city. Now, one would assume that a gradual reversal from neglect to serious efforts of preserving the site and its beauty would have taken place after its inscription on the World Heritage List in 1985. The sad truth, however, is that so far very little has happened to ensure the survival even of the most prominent examples of the Nabatean architecture. And in 2010, for example, Petra was almost put on the site of endangered list. You know, it was last minute efforts by the Jordanian government to avoid this really sad story. But also Petra is really in real danger. Petra is really suffering from damage and deterioration, which happened around the clock in an alarming rate. Now, if it took about 15 centuries to obliterate more than 80% of the facades, how long it will take until these last preserved samples of Nabatean architecture have disappeared? People think that decay is a linear process. It is not. Decay is an accelerating process, almost exponential. And we think that it is much shorter than people think, that Petra may disappear for good. Petra monuments, most of them will disappear. And you can see on this slide, for example, the facade of the Palace tomb, one of the biggest maybe and most magnificent ones, but almost erosion and deterioration cause a disappearance of most of the details of this facade. This is why from the very beginning, the damage assessment and diagnosis, the study of this damage and the diagnosis of causes of degradation of Petra monuments attracted the attention of not just our team, but also many international teams who worked in Petra for years, trying to identify the weathering forms and understanding the weathering mechanism and decaying mechanisms and forms. It is really a very complex situation in, getting into this weathering process is a very complex mutual relationship exists between stone types, stone property, monument exposure regimes, environmental influences, weathering phenomena, development and extent of weathering damage, and weathering progression. It's really a very complex issue that needs to be carefully studied and analyzed. So today I will just present to you the main results that we obtained from this weathering analysis based on our research and on the research of some other partners who worked in Petra in terms of weathering factors and weathering damage forms and in terms of their type and intensity. So causes of deterioration and damage of Petra can be divided into two major categories: natural factors and anthropogenic factors, human, man-made factors. Now, the natural agents of deterioration can be also subdivided into fast, sudden, and hazardous events, like, for example, on the top of these earthquakes, as Petra lies very close to the famous Dead Sea Jordan Rift, which is really a very active, tectonically active region. And we have a record. This is a typical earthquake damage you see in one of the temples of Petra. And this is a record of historical earthquakes that hit Petra over the years. The last one was in 1834 AD with a magnitude of 6.3 on Richter scale. It's all, major and strong earthquakes and caused a great deal of damage of the city. The second factor, which is really a very important one and a very damaging one, is the flash floods. Although Petra has a semi-arid climate and the annual rainfall is not appreciable, but at certain occasions, there be some torrential rains that really happened in a short period of time and causing these flash floods. And serious flash floods have occurred in the Sieg as a result of the long neglect and resulting destruction of the ancient water management system, as the Nabateans really were clever enough, they were creative enough to protect their city from the flash floods by building a very elaborate hydraulic system. But this hydraulic system really is, because of neglect and weathering, is really almost destroyed. And the city is now with no protection whatsoever from the flash floods. And the flash floods took some lives really in Petra at different occasions. Slow but resistant natural weathering factors. On the top of these really are salt crystallization, wetting and drying cycles because of the fluctuating humidity and temperature, thermal cycles, water runoff, and wind erosion. And you can see the damage forms everywhere in Petra by these natural weathering factors. For example, this is an example of water runoff. Water runoff is really a major problem because of the destruction of the water divergence systems that created by the Nabateans. Now you have the seep of water on the face of the facades causing this really great damage. Biological deterioration by macroorganisms and microorganisms, higher plants, goats, bees, wasps, and other insects, as well as birds, especially these trees, the higher plants growing on the face of these monuments, causing a great deal of pressure and cracks on these monuments. Microorganisms like fungi, lichens, mosses, bacteria, all are there. Now, what really worsened the situation is the man-made damage. Man-made really is really a great threat to Petra. What has been done by human being, people who really live around Petra or visit Petra. For example, goat herding and agricultural practices causing a great deal of damage to the environment. For example, overgrazing cause a loss of the vegetation cover, and this enhance, for example, the wind erosion. The random urban growth, the uncontrolled growth of constructions lead to a more concrete housing, and large number of hotels, for example, after the increased demand of tourism, there have been a large number of hotels built in the city, And some of them really, unfortunately, were built in an area which is designated as a no building zone, like the one in this slide. That's built on the very, entrance of the Petra. Tourism growth inside Petra is, okay, Petra is really a famous tourist attraction site. We like this. We really think tourism is something good for Petra and for Jordan economy and for local economy, for the sustainable development of local economy, of local people. But when you really take that many tourists, large number of tourists at a time in the site, over it is carrying capacity, this really has a great deal of really negative impacts on the site, especially increase in humidity, for example, inside monuments. When there is a large crowd at a time, that will increase the humidity, and when they leave, the humidity will drop. This fluctuating humidity is not good, and these people and activity related to tourists put a great pressure really and a great risk of damage to the monuments. Uncontrolled excavations in Petra is a big problem. We know that Petra is a very famous site, and people from all over the world, archaeologists from all over the world, they like to come and excavate in Petra. And also, we think on the other side that Petra full interpretation needs these archaeological works, but the uncontrolled excavation licenses, there's too much excavations, especially in the projects where they left structures, excavated structures, exposed to deterioration factors without any conservation whatsoever, is really not good for the site. And we have some examples of this really bad, what we call bad excavations in terms of preservation. Maybe they are good for archaeological information, and some of them are really lead to major discoveries in the site. But also these excavations attract looters because these sites are left almost unprotected. So that encourage looters and illicit diggers to come to the site, and that's a big problem really in Petra, illicit excavation and the smuggling of artifacts from the city. Graffiti is another problem in Petra, where people are really like to inscribe their names on the monuments using all sorts of materials, from lipsticks to ink to charcoal to whatever. They use all sorts of material, which really pose a very challenging conservation issue for us, because you need to deal with material of different chemical nature and different composition. So this is really a big problem. Just to summarize the situation, we could identify like 19 agents of deterioration between natural and human, and unfortunately they work together at the same time, around the clock. They work against the existence of this site. So you have all sorts of deterioration and decay caused by these natural and human factors going unstopped. Now, the next step in our research was to identify the damage forms and associate them with their causes, because before we go to proposing any conservation intervention, whether preventive or remedial, we need really to understand the weathering and decay scale, mechanisms, nature, and factors. And this association between damage forms and causes is very important. And we created like an atlas of damage forms, and we classified them into groups and subgroups ranging from detachment of stone materials, which under this come sanding, flaking, scaling, exploitation, loose masonry, and the loss of stone material like pitting and other forms, spalling, for example, and outbreaks, back weathering, washouts, and also we have formation of deposits on the stone material called by salt fluorescence, salt crusts, and microbiological deterioration. Vegetation, insects, and bird droppings, graffiti, soiling, soot really is a problem in some of the caves where locals used to use these caves for fire. They fire inside the caves, and this really caused a great deal of soot deposits on these monuments. So we have also cracks, faults, structural instability, especially in the built monuments like Casserole Bent, as I will mention later, collapsed walls, mortar disintegration, and so on. So then the first part of our efforts is really to understand the weathering phenomenon in Petra, try to understand and explain the damage forms and associate them with their causes. And then we started to think of conservation efforts, what to do. And this can be divided really into two major approaches: preventive conservation measures and remedial conservation measures. The preventive conservation, I will just mention that we were part of a project of the restoration of the Nabatean hydraulic system. And this is really, some efforts have been done to restore some of the dams and some of the terraces of Petra, aiming to restore the hydraulic, the Nabatean hydraulic system as part of the attraction of the city and for the protection of the city as well from the flash flood, as I mentioned. And I hope this project will be completed because it is almost partially done. And then some efforts has been done for cleaning of water channels to prevent this runoff, water runoff damage. And also we were part of an effort to do some awareness and education of the local community. That's very important for enhancing the awareness and understanding of local people for the importance and significance of their site. Now, the remedial conservation, we were involved in two big projects: conservation plan of Casserole Bent as an example of a built monument in Petra, and conservation plan of monument 8025, which is one of the stone carved monuments opposite to the treasury, the famous Khazna or treasury monument. In this presentation, I will just give you some details about the first project, which is the conservation plan of Casserole Bent, because time will not allow me to go over the two projects. There are a lot of details, and I want really to be as complete as possible in presenting this project. We also participated in a capacity building efforts for the BDTRA and the Department of Antiquities of Jordan in terms of installing laboratory equipment for in situ testing, and also for training and really building a real capacity for the conservation of this site. Now we'll move to the conservation plan for the monument of Casserole Bent, Petra. This is a rare built monument. It's one of the rare built structures in the city of Petra. And it was built as a temple during the late Nabatean period. In addition to deterioration and decay caused by natural factors, this monument, suffered from a bad conservation, what we call wrong conservation. In a previous conservation trials happened 2 times, where cement, mortar, and reinforced concrete were used in the restoration works and in the reconstruction of the staircase wall, as shown in this slide. Now, the application of the very hard and salty cement mortar resulted in catastrophic consequences, evident by localized severe damage to the adjacent stone blocks. Because of the importance and because of this bad experience, our approach for dealing with this monument was really a very cautious one. So we think that before any suggested conservation, a thorough and rigorous technical evaluation of conservation options in terms of techniques and material should be really done. So our adopted approach includes the following steps: architectural description and structural analysis of the monument, and then investigation into the nature and the properties of Casserole Bent building material. So identify what type of building materials used, to identify their physical and chemical properties. Weathering analysis, a detailed study of weathering causes and forms, and mapping of the weathering forms of all the walls. Laboratory and field testing program of stone consolidants. I think because of the decay of some of the stone blocks, a proper consolidant is needed to restore the strength of these stones. And then laboratory and field testing program of repair mortars and grouts that aim at finding the optimum mortar formulation for consolidation and repair of the structural elements of the monument. Now, identification of the nature and the property of the building material was done by the standard procedure. Petrography, for example, was used in addition to X-ray diffraction. So we could identify what type of sandstone. We know it's a Cambrian sandstone, but we can identify now some of it is physical and chemical properties in terms, for example, of it is poor volume and the monocrystalline quartz and other cementing material of the stone, the microcrystalline carbonate, the clayey material, the iron compounds, and secondary siliceous cements were all identified in this sandstone. We also identified the mortar type used in Casserole Bent using thin section analysis, point counting, and X-ray diffraction, and the microscopic examination, so that all the mortar samples are lime-based. But it's very important that we identify the exact formulation of the mortars and additives and some physical and chemical properties of the mortar, especially if conservation using mortars is considered in order to use this formulation in future conservation. Also, state of weathering of the monument was thoroughly studied. So identification of the deterioration processes and their causes should be identified before any actions is really considered. Mapping of the weathering form of Casserole Bent resulted in the identification of 14 damage forms, ranging from loss of important structural elements to damage caused by previous conservation treatments, including detachment of some stone blocks, relief, flakes, spalling, exploitation, cracks, salt crust, salt fluorescence, all sorts of damages, and really were found there. So we have done mapping of all the walls from the exterior walls and interior walls were really studied and mapped. And then we conducted a laboratory and field testing program for the selection of the best consolidant to be used in our future conservation plan. As I mentioned, that stone decay is really serious in the stone blocks of Casserole Bent, and replacement of these stone blocks is not an option because of the value and significance of this important monument. We have to keep the authenticity of the monument as much as we can. So a proper consolidant is badly needed. And the stone consolidant were really selected. Stone consolidants were really selected based on a performance criteria, a strict performance criteria of 10 requirements. For example, consolidant to be selected should be able to increase the cohesive strength of the treated stone. It should really penetrate the stone enough to restore its integrity and strength, especially the weathering zone of the stone. Absence of deleterious or chemical or physical interaction between the consolidant and the stone. The creation of a continuous hardness profile, low coefficient of thermal expansion, should be sympathetic in nature to the stone, water vapor permeability and water repellency, ease of application, user safe and economical because of the scale of Petra, and long-term effectiveness. So against this criteria, we designed a laboratory testing program and the field testing program. And we tested really a group of commercially available consolidants that really proved to some success in some sites, especially for sandstone at different locations in the Middle East and Europe. And we could identify, based on this literature and some communication that we have with the manufacturers, we could identify 5 of them. Bakar OH, this is the commercial name. It's a salicylic acid ester, the chemical nature. It's a stone strengthener. And Vakar H, these are a German-made material. Salicylic acid ester and alkoxysilane to add this hydrophobic effect. And Funcosil OH, which is a salicylic acid ester, again, a stone strengthener. Bfix is an Austrian material. It has been developed in cooperation between an institute in Austria and Yarmouk University. And silane is a methyl trimethoxysilane water repellent. So our laboratory and field testing program include a series of tests like consolidant uptake value, depth of penetration, water absorption, water vapor permeability, salt encapsulation test, salt crystallization test, mechanical strength, and resistance to freeze-thaw damage. And the results really show that most of these consolidants lead to an improvement, especially in the compressive strength of the stone, for example. There is a big enhancement of the stone strength when you compare the untreated stone with the treated one. And also some of these consolidants give really some positive results regarding the penetration depth and water vapor permeability and water absorption. And this laboratory test results were used to design a field testing program to test and evaluate the performance of these consolidants under real environments. This field testing program took us like a period of 18 months, where at different intervals, readings were taken and samples were taken and analyzed in the laboratory for the different properties that I mentioned. In addition to the stone consolidant testing program, we also conducted a repair mortars and grouting testing program, laboratory and field again. And the aim was to evaluate the suitability and compatibility of a number of repair mortars for the structural repair and consolidation of Casserole Bent. So for example, the performance criteria includes that repair mortar should not be stronger than the stone and should not be excessively stronger than the original mortar. And it shouldn't really release or emit soluble salts into the stone and structure. And again, we selected a number of two commercial mortars and a lime mortar that we prepared based in our analysis of the ancient mortar used by the Nabateans. So Funcosil mortar, this is a ready-made mortar that's composed of cementitious raw materials which can be used without any additives. A Namix mortar, again, is a mortar composed of complex organic polymers with silicate chemical reactive groups in aqueous solutions. A lime mortar is really a hydrated lime and sand in a ratio of 1:4 by mass based on our analysis. Laboratory testing program include mechanical properties, determining the uniaxial compressive strength, the modulus of elasticity and tensile strength of the mortars, water absorption by total immersion, capillary water absorption, water vapor permeability, shrinkage, deformation, and bond between stone and mortar. So again, show you some of the results of the laboratory test program. And this, for example, the results of the shrinkage, deformation after 7 days, 14 days, and 28 days. And the least, for example, shrinkage was observed for the Funcosil mortar. Water vapor transmission resistance, again, the Namix mortar performed better. And for the enhancement of the strength, bonding between the mortar and the stone, the best one was, again, the Namix mortar. Funcosil and lime mortar are really comparable in that regard. And field testing program, again, was really to investigate the efficiency and durability of the conservation treatments under real environment conditions. Monitoring of the exposition tests includes steady observation as well as a periodic documentation of the measurements to evaluate the various conservation materials. And this is part of our test field. We use one of the quarries near Petra to be our test field for the application of the different mortar samples, and then try, as much as we can to imitate the real environment and to understand the real behavior, the behavior of this material under real environmental conditions. So we monitored the appearance, the hardness, and the water absorption over a period of 18 months of these mortars. And after we have all these results from the laboratory and the field, and after a true and real understanding of the weathering forms and causes of the weathering, we reached a state where really we could start thinking of proposing some conservation intervention. As you see that we needed like 3 years of laboratory and field testing before we could really answer the question about the extent of conservation first, what to do in terms of conservation, whether to adopt a preservation or restoration or reconstruction, or most likely a mixed approach, which really combined all of these together. So we did a reconstruction of the monument using 3D modeling, just, and based on archaeological evidence and based on the technology, we could really have an understanding of the original structure, the original shape and details of this monument. Our suggested conservation actions include really four major components. We think that in order to preserve this monument, we need to have a structural intervention and repair of the walls and some repair of exterior and interior walls using grouting and mortar, and we need to do a stone consolidation. And here is really the details of the structural intervention. Maybe I will not go over the very details of these because they are really, really detailed in order to guide the practice in the future. For example, one of the major deficiencies of Casserole Bent is the lack of proper horizontal diaphragms and interconnections between these diaphragms and the supporting masonry walls. There is no integrity of the structure. So the structure needs to be tied together along wall lines in both directions and at the floor and roof levels to probably survive any future earthquake. So that's why we suggested wall head beams to be inserted at a certain height and to support the diaphragm actions and help in creating the wall integrities. Also, the deteriorated arch above the main wall entrance should be strengthened by the application of a stronger mortar, Namix or lime mortar based on our results between the deteriorated joints, and by consolidating the stone with the salicylic acid esters, Funcosil OH, gave the best performance both in the laboratory and in the field testing program. So also a detailed procedures for cleaning and repairing the walls, cleaning the surface of the wall using compressed air to remove dust, loose stands, fragments. And after complete cleaning, stones are suffered from excessive damage, disintegration, or severe cracking must be removed and replaced with sound stones. And here it might be debatable, but some of the stones are really beyond repair. They are, damaged, as also consolidation cannot do the job. So in some cases, we need to replace some of the stones. Repairing all types of cracks using different combination of mortars and the grouts, structural cracks, large width cracks, and voids. So we proposed really different formulations. Some mortars will be injected, some will be applied, and also a different mortar will be, different mortar formulation will be applied at different locations. In case of complete separation and detachment and vertical splitting, such as the lower portions of the eastern and northern walls, this must be removed and rebuilt in the same style. Some people might think this is really drastic, and in terms of conservation, people tend to be conservative. But in order to preserve and safeguard this structure, the whole monument, sometimes you have to compromise. Stone stitching is also another technique that we proposed. It can be used to make sufficient interconnection between the walls. Steel ties place could also be used as another method to tie separated wall sections. More elaborate filling technique is required in the case of large voids. Galvanized iron pans with outlets at the bottom can be used in this case. The extensive cracks and loss of the binding mortar is really observed as the most obvious symptoms of damage of Casserole Bent. So we need to really use a repair mortar, a suitable repair mortar in this case. So we really here propose the use of different mortar formulations. The tested mortar proved to be useful, but at different use and at different locations, and for different really repair aims. So sometimes we use Namex, sometimes we use lime mortar. It's really a combination of different mortars is really proposed. Stone consolidation again is needed because stone of Casserole Bent decay to really a degree that sometimes need to be strengthened, need to be restored. The strength of the stone is need to be restored, and the only possible technique to do this is really by using a consolidant that's well tested and proved to perform well in the laboratory and field testing program. As I mentioned, the replacement of the distressed stone is not an option, or should be the last resort due to importance and significance of this monument. There is no single consolidant which can be effectively used to consolidate all the stones of Casserole Bent. Again, a combination of consolidants can be used for different types of decay and different degree and intensity of decay. So Vacar OH and Fancosil OH both proved to be effective consolidant system, and they proved to both consolidants proved to be significantly that can significantly improve the stone strength by depositing a stone binding material within the stone pores in the weathering zone. And they also improve the stone resistance to water absorption, and keeping the stone breathing space as well, which is a very important condition. So here, the details really of how to apply the stone consolidants at the different sections of the monument and at the different locations. Now, the implementation of this conservation or suggested plan is under consideration. Negotiation between the university and BDTRA is underway. And the major hurdle for the implementation of this 3Z conservation plan is the lack of financial resources. So we hope we can manage to get some international assistance in order to really implement a badly needed conservation action to safeguard this important monument. I hope that I just give you a glimpse of the research results that we have over the years. In the future occasion, I hope to share with you results of our research on the stone carved monuments. But for today, I would like to thank you very much for listening